monitor or have my slides in front, so I won't see like wave or anything. So I don't mind if y'all interrupt me.
Okay. I have started the recording. The floor is yours, sir.
And you can definitely see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, I know most of you know me, Tosh. Tosh does not know me. I'm Raymond Camden. I am a lead developer evangelist for a company called Here. We do location stuff, which is part of what I'm talking about today. I blog at raymondcamden.com and I tweet at Raymond Camden. And I really like to get questions. So any of y'all, if you have any questions about what I'm showing today or anything at all, period, beer development, Star Wars, whatever, drop me a line. A lot of times I could turn questions into blog posts, and that helps other people as well. So I absolutely don't mind you reaching out to me and asking me a question. My general game plan today is to start off by just quickly describing what the JAMStack actually is. I'm then going to walk us through looking at one particular version of that. And then I'm going to talk about what I mean by location services, because that's kind of broad. And then with that, we're going to look at many, many, many demos. And I'll say everything I'm showing today, the slide deck and the demos, it's all up on GitHub. So you could download this, you could play with the code I'm showing, and you can go to town with it and go crazy. So let's start by talking about the JAMStack. To be clear, this is 100% marketing. Like whatever number is beyond 100%, this is like a bazillion marketing, like the cloud and related type stuff. I kind of got into this space back when it was just called static websites, which was a nice and simple thing. However, whenever I would get like people excited about it, I would say, yeah, it's a static website, but you can still do A, B, and C with it. And one of the reasons I kind of like the JAMStack is that it does kind of reset expectations. It means a couple of things, just like the cloud. People know that the cloud's not a literal cloud, but it is a way of doing things. JAMStack kind of gets us past the old expectations or the old thinking about what a static website means. So JAMStack comes from an abbreviation, the JAM, where J stands for JavaScript. So by that, I mean just real simple, adding interactivity to web pages. It does not mean that what you're building is a single page application. And one of the things that I kind of harp on is that I really dislike how a lot of the discussion about JavaScript is focused on single page applications. I feel like people have forgotten that sometimes you could use just a little bit of JavaScript. Sometimes you could just take a page and make it better. And that's one of the reasons why I love Vue.js so much. I'm not talking about Vue tonight, but Vue works really well both in the SVA space as well as the I just want to make a page a little bit better. So to be clear, JAMStack does not imply that you're building a single page application. And in fact, your end result may have no JavaScript at all rendered in the client. Typically there is no, because the JavaScript that we use ends up being a replacement for things that we used to do on the server. So in the JAMStack, the A stands for APIs. And by APIs, basically we mean any service out there that we can hit via HTTP. There are a few of these. There's a great GitHub repository. Why aren't you loading? Open a new tab. Called public-APIs. And they have this incredible long list of all these different APIs that you can play with. So there is quite a few APIs out there that you could then work with JavaScript. The only issue that you typically have there is working with APIs that require security keys or APIs that don't have cores. Luckily, there is an incredibly simple workaround for both of those issues.
What's cores?
Core stands for cross-origin resource sharing.
Okay.
For security. If you build JavaScript on a.com, and don't go to a.com, it's probably a porn site, but imagine you are building a.com and you want to hit something on b.com. By default, the browser says you can't do that because that may be a security issue. However, the API on b.com, by just adding a header to their API response, will broadcast to the browser, yes, you can call me from anywhere you want. But if the API is not doing that, then you're out of luck. However, there is a workaround for that. I don't really show an example of it, but I do talk about it on like the very last slide. But yeah, I mean, there's a way to get around that, but that's something that people will run into. They'll see a cool API, they'll try to use it from JavaScript, and the browser will just block it. Typically, the browser will literally say blocked for cores or something like that. So it's obvious why it's not working.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem. The M in JAM stands for markup. And by markup, we mean HTML. The end result is going to be HTML pages. But a lot of times, this HTML will be generated from things like Markdown or other languages. So taking that and kind of putting it together, there's kind of two core aspects that we'll look at. The first will be the static site generator that I will write as SSG because it's a heck of a lot less typing. This is the tool that we'll use to actually create static websites. And then the last thing will be the host. And this is no different than finding a host for your ColdFusion, PHP, whatever site in the past, although your options are a bit simpler working with the JAMStack. Talking about SSGs, this will be on your machine an application server. So if you're used to working with ColdFusion or PHP or .NET, typically you have the app server running locally on your machine, and when you deploy to production, it's also running the application server. With an SSG, I only have the app server locally. So I will run that particular server, I will edit files, and I will see my updates. Again, very much like ColdFusion or PHP. But when I'm done, and here's the big difference, the end result is 100% flat files. No ColdFusion-ish or PHP-ish type code in there at all. There are many different options for SSGs. Last time I checked, there were about 300 or 400 or so. And this website is staticgen.com and just gives you a listing of all the different ones out there. So the good news is that you have options. Like most things in life and most things that we encounter as developers, some you're going to really dig. You'll be like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And some you will absolutely hate, and it will rarely fall in between. Like you will either just despise how something works or you will love it. They all do the same thing for the most part. But much like ColdFusion, PHP, .NET, they have the same result. Actually working in those different application servers will either appeal to you or not appeal to you at all. So my personal history, I started with a project called Harp.js. It's dead. The website still works. You can still download it, but it's not been developed on for a very long time. However, I'm really happy that I found it because compared to other static site generators, Harp was really simple. It had just a couple of features, and that made it really easy to kind of start playing with and taking a look at. I then switched to Hugo. Hugo is very popular because it's very fast. So I used Hugo for my blog, which has over 6,000 blog posts, and Hugo would churn through that in about 30 seconds. Compare that to Jekyll, which is what I went to next, and Jekyll took about 15 minutes. Now, Jekyll has definitely made speed improvements since that time, but Hugo, while it did everything, I didn't like how it did stuff. I would try to do something a little bit custom, but a little bit different, and I felt like Hugo would fight me. And that's very much like any programming language or framework out there, right? Some things are easy, some things are hard. For me, I felt like Hugo did everything hard. Jekyll, I really liked, even though it was a little bit slower, but it was Ruby. So I'm on a Windows machine, and Ruby does not want to be installed on Windows. It actively fights against you. You can do it, and then once you have it installed, as long as you never upgrade, you're fine. But whenever I would move to a new machine or get something new, I would dread that particular aspect. For about 5 or 6 months now, I've been using one called Elevity, and Elevity just like hits all the dots for me. Like, it really works well for me. So today I'll be showing Elevity, but just keep in mind that it's one particular way of doing what I'm doing, and you have a lot of different options out there to find the one that matches your development style. So in terms of the host, luckily, like, you have files. That's it. Every single ISP since the internet began has supported hosting files. Luckily, there are some options that are very much attuned to that. So for example, Amazon S3 allows you to put files up there and turn on web browsing. Azure, literally like last month, launched their solution for doing static website hosting. On top of these kind of like, mostly kind of bare bones but serviceable solutions, you also have companies who are specifically targeting the JAMStack and kind of adding bells and whistles that make working with the JAMStack nicer on their systems. Netlify is pretty much the gold standard. Like, I recommend them 100% of the time. Vercel is pretty cool. I don't dislike them, but like, it's a thing like, one is $100 and like one is $92. That's both really good, but one is definitely better. I tend to use Netlify for my real projects, for things that I know I'm going to keep forever. And I tend to use Vercel for, I need to run this site for like a few days, or I want to show a client and I don't care if I touch it ever again. So why would we do this? So why would we, I know most of us here have experience working with application servers, and that gives us a lot of power. So why would we give up that power? Well, one thing, it's going to be a lot faster because it's literally serving a file and like nothing else. That also means that you are more secure. I purposely did not write secure as in you're 100% secure. You're not. But you absolutely have less attack vectors. You don't have an application server that can be hacked. You don't have a database server that can be hacked. All you have is flat files. And you have what I call shifted complexity. And by that, I mean, working with the JAMStack a lot of times feels simpler, but you can absolutely still have complexity involved. So if I were to walk you through my blog, originally, it was very simple. It was Google Compute, MySQL, PHP, Apache, and WordPress. And WordPress is an amazing environment for running a blog. That was not too terribly complex. I moved to the JAMStack, and I ended up having something that was a lot of configuration. It took me a lot of work to get it to the point where it was outputting what I want. However, all of that complexity was on my local machine. It wasn't in the cloud. What I encountered with WordPress was that once a week, it would crash. I would get a 500 error, and it was either MySQL or PHP crashing or whatever. And my blog gets a decent amount of traffic, but absolutely not like heavy .com traffic. And it was really bothersome. Like, I remember like going to bed thinking, is my blog going to crash overnight? So while that setup was a bit simpler, I still was concerned about it. My current system is definitely a bit more complex, but it's all on my local machine. If something breaks, I can immediately get in there. I know my code. I can tweak it. I can get it working again. Best of all, if it breaks, it's just my machine. I haven't broken production at all. So that's why. There's certainly reasons why you may not want to consider the JAMStack. The editing experience for like working with content like a blog is definitely not WordPress level. This particular area though has seen a huge amount of change over the last year. There are a lot of companies now that basically focus on just this one aspect. They provide nice non-developer facing type interfaces to JAMStack setups such that a client who can barely operate their phone can still edit content. But this is definitely a reason that would potentially make you think, maybe this is not for me. And even though you're not running an application server, you may end up using more remote services. So I'll use Cold Fusion, for example. Cold Fusion had email built into it. So if I wanted to send mail, I was using the same application server. On the JAMStack, there's absolutely multiple different ways to send email, but I'm definitely picking a remote service. So I may end up going from one Cold Fusion service and maybe one particular, like I'd say, video encoding service I'm using. I may go from that to having a service for form processing, a service for file uploads, the existing video encode service. So I may end up having 5 or 6 different things that I have to be concerned about and ensure is working correctly. So my take, and obviously if you follow me on Twitter or read my blog, I'm really all about this. I look at my history of web development, and I've been working on the web since '93 or so. I discovered back-end coding very early on. I did Perl CGI scripting. I did Cold Fusion for 15 plus years. I lived in the app server. When I look back at what I have built, like 90% of what I had built could have been static easily. And I could have deployed without SQL Server or in the old days, Access databases. I could have skipped all that and just did flat files. Not 100% of what I've done, but a strong majority of what I had done could have been static. And also, again, being that I'm old, I've been around for a long time, I've seen just how much better browsers have become. You can absolutely trust them a heck of a lot more than I used to in the old days. So in the old days, I could definitely see, like, oh, even though I have JavaScript, I'm not going to do table sorting because like IE5 will just barf on it. So I'll use Cold Fusion. I'll go to the server. I'll do a page reload for all that. Stuff like that, I would absolutely feel very safe doing that on the Clyde side only. And with that too, we're seeing so many APIs out there to do so many different services. And definitely with the rise of JAMStack, services tailored just for the JAMStack, they are rising as well. So, like I said earlier, I love that I could write bad code and say, I don't care about performance. It's on my machine, or it's code that will run when my site is building, because after that, I'm just serving up files. And that's so freeing for me to be able to just write code, and if the end result's fine, screw it if it looks ugly. It's ugly on my machine, my result's nice HTML, and I really, really dig that. So that's why I like the JAMStack. Any questions on that before I go on?
I have a question about static websites. Is that too far off topic?
No, not at all.
So the thing that has always the thing that I can't get my head to move past is when I use like a CMS like WordPress, to use your example from before. That's all on a server somewhere. I can log into my WordPress site on my laptop, on somebody else's laptop, on the library computer. If I see a typo on my website, it doesn't matter what machine I'm on, I can log on and fix that typo or add the new alert or paragraph of text I need to add from anywhere. And the static site generators, that seems to go away, and I have to install some stack of stuff on my laptop before I can update any of the content. How do I get past that blocker and get more to the WordPress style or CMS style flow?
So this goes back to where I said the editing experience is not ideal, but there's multiple companies who have realized this and they're building tools for that. One of them is StackBit, where Brian Rinaldi is now. I'm pretty sure it's StackBit. Yeah, where they literally have added CMS type things for that would be appropriate for, not just non-devs, but a dev who wants something quick and doesn't want to open up an editor. So yes, there are solutions for that. It requires an extra step, but typically it's not that big of a deal. You just add it as part of your process.
You add it to my personal laptop though, right?
So no, so most of the time people are using GitHub. So like my blog is on GitHub. So I use a code editor. I edit my markdown file. I commit it to GitHub, and then my process will take the files from Git and run a build and spit out HTML. So in theory, if I find a typo and I really care about it, if I have a web browser at like a local library, I can go in GitHub, log in, edit the file there. Experience is not great, but I can do it anywhere at all.
Okay.
So these services, they almost always typically integrate with GitHub, and you do some prep work, like, oh, here's where my blog articles are, and here's a few rules I have in terms of categories and stuff like that. Once you tell that service those rules, it can load the markdown file and give you a nice WYSIWYG interface.
Okay,
and
got it.
Save and do stuff like that.
That makes sense. Cool. Thank you.
No problem.
I had looked at Jekyll, I don't know, a couple of years ago and spent a day with it. And I really like the notion of sort of no bloat, no extra crap, just that kind of stuff. But I was like, yeah, but if a client needs to manage content, they're going to have to write Markdown. That seemed kind of like, and it's nice to know that there's now some companies, like you said, that are really kind of working on solving that problem because yeah, so much of what's out there is just bloated mess.
Yeah. I'll point out Netlify, who I use for hosting, they also have a CMS product as well. And I'm looking under their platform. So they just changed their UI. I'm not really a big fan of it. But somewhere in here, they have a CMS product as well that gives a nice web interface to stuff.
And does it, and that's a JAMStack thing?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, cool.
So I use them for hosting. Maybe it's under deploy and hosting. Somewhere in here, they have stuff about their CMS. I'm really surprised that I'm not seeing it change their mind about doing it. But yeah, even if they don't have it, there's definitely, let me try their search. CMS, migrate your WordPress and open source. Okay, maybe they're not talking about as much anymore. But again, I know StackBit has good solutions for it.
Interesting.
Yeah. In fact, the solution I think that they have is that they can actually do like widgets on a web page. So your client can go to their site and see if they're logged in, they see a widget and they can click to edit, and it's very like GUI focused.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. So the one that I'm going to talk about is Eleveny, and again, like if the way that you see me use Eleveny, sorry, I see Rob talking, but you're muted. Was that for us or for somebody else? If so, I'm sorry for calling you out. Okay, let's do somebody else. Yeah, so don't worry too much about like the particulars of how Eleveny does stuff. Think about what it's doing, how I'm working locally, I'm spitting out HTML. If you don't like Eleveny, again, you have 300 plus different ways of doing this. So I'm giving like 5 or 10 minutes or so of Eleveny. I obviously won't touch on everything, but enough at least to talk about the location stuff that's coming next. So in a nutshell, it is node-based, and to me, coming from Jekyll and having to fight Ruby, that was a really nice change that I appreciated. It is extremely flexible, and that goes back to what I was saying about Hugo. Hugo was very fast, but I felt like it was very kind of locked in, whereas Eleveny is kind of like, hey, I'll let you do anything, any crazy crap you want to do, I will allow that. And as we all know, some frameworks are really tight, and some, allow you to have a foot gun. I don't mind having a foot gun at time. Currently version 0.11, that's coincidence. I don't think they're staying at version 11 being called Eleveny, but they just went to this version like a month or so ago, so it's still kind of new. And you can find out more about what I'm talking about at 11t.dev. Installation being node-based, you do an npm install, you do add Eleveny/Eleveny, and you get a CLI. CLI is incredibly simple. It literally either runs once to take your source and just spit out straight HTML, or I could do Eleveny serve to have a server where I can do stuff and reload and see things running. There are a couple of more options like The default output is a folder called _site, and if you want to tweak that, the CLI allows you to do that. So I'm going to show you a quick example of the bare simplest thing I can do. Is my text readable on my terminal?
Yep.
All right. So we are going to make a quick folder here, make dir test0, cd test0, and I'm going to go in my editor and close up all this and go into trash and make a new file. And I'm going to call this test.md. I'm going to write some markdown, which if you've never seen, just allows you to shortcut HTML. Hello world. This is a paragraph. This is italics and so forth. So straight, simple HTML. And I'm back at my terminal. Oh, I'm clicking the wrong thing. There we go. Back at my terminal, I'm just going to confirm I'm in the right folder. And I'm just going to run 11e. And literally all it's going to do is find the one file I have and spit out HTML. If I go back in Studio, I can see I have an _site. I have an HTML file. Not terribly exciting. If I try 11e serve, I will get a local web server at localhost 8080. We'll go in there right here, and I called it test. So 11e by default, if I have a file called foo.markdown or foo.whatever, it assumes a URL path of /foo, and you can modify that to be whatever you want. So now I can look at that. I can say, you know what? I'm really excited. So I'll save the markdown, and I will reload. 11e also supports hot reload, but it only supports it when you have a complete HTML page. And by that I mean a HTML tag, a head, a body, and a close HTML tag. My markdown literally was just a header and a paragraph. Once I start working with layouts and you see, the full HTML thing, you'll see 11e will actually reload while you work on stuff, and that's really handy. So that's one file, not terribly useful so far. But let's start looking at a couple of the features. So one of the things it supports is multiple different template languages. So if you like handlebars, if you like mustache, if you like pug, which used to be jade, 11e supports all of those different languages and allows you to pick the ones you want. What's really cool is that you can actually mix and match. And normally you wouldn't do that for a project. You want to stick to like one language. Like you typically wouldn't have a site with, a lot of Vue.js and then one page with Angular. However, the language that I prefer, Liquid, is pretty flexible, but still has certain rules about what you can do with it. I needed to build a page on my blog that had crazy bad code and had this crazy code. EJS is a lot like classic ASP, and if you remember classic ASP, it was ugly as heck, but EJS allows you to do anything. So what I love is that on that one page, I used EJS. I had the flexibility I needed. I wrote some crazy ugly code. It worked, and the rest of my site uses Markdown and Liquid and has, quote unquote, nicer code. But I love that 11e gave me that flexibility to kind of do what I needed to in that one particular case. It also supports layouts. So if I want to have multiple different pages and they all need to share one layout file, 11e makes that simple. And you can do includes to do basic text-based include. So if I wanted to have, boilerplate text or something that's used on multiple pages, I could drop that in an include and then just include that information. If you've never seen a template language like Handlebars or Liquid before, it's basically HTML plus code. So it does stuff like hello and then some kind of marker, variable name, close marker. So if you know Cold Fusion, that'd be pound, variable pound. PHP is bracket, question mark, or whatever. I've not done PHP in 10 years, so it's probably changed since then. But so these languages will have a way to say, I have a variable, I'll put that variable in this HTML. It will also have a way to do an if condition and an else condition and an if else condition, and will look something like this. I'll have a bracket that says if some Boolean, I'll have my stuff, and then I'll have a way to end that particular condition. And then typically they'll also have a way to iterate. So if I have an array of data, I can iterate over that array, give each iteration a name, in this case cat, and then within that particular loop, work with my value. All the languages that I showed, except for Markdown, but like handlebars, Pug, etc., they all support working with stuff like this. So I'm going to show an example. And this is demo 1. And what I did is I created a page called index.liquid. So I like the liquid language. Again, if you don't like it, you have multiple different other ways of doing code. And I did a couple of different things here. First, I added some front matter on top. Front matter is basically metadata about a file. Pretty much every static site generator supports something like this, where you put code on top of a file that describes the file. Again, it's metadata about the file. In this case, I've given my file a title variable, and I've also specified a layout. When 11e sees this, it says layout, it's going to look in a folder called includes for a file called, in this case, main.something. Again, 11e is freeform in terms of liquid, handlebars, etc. So if I just do main, it's going to look at all its supported languages. My layout file is using a Bootstrap template where I literally just copied and pasted. And the only thing I did really different is that I know in Bootstrap, all the stuff goes within a div with a class equals container. I put a variable there called content. And 11e will inject my current page into the content variable. And this is what allows me then to do essentially page wrapping stuff for all my pages. This is a simple example of how to do an include. Footer is just outputting some HTML. That could have been in my layout as well, but I wanted to show an example of an include. And what's cool is that I could also do this in my Markdown files as well. So in my little simple blog here, I have 2 posts, apple.md and beta.md. They're both using titles and they're both specifying a layout. If I run this, demo 1, oops, nope, cd demo 1, cd demos, cd demo 1, I can type. I'll do 11e serve, and we will reload my demo. I can see the Bootstrap template fired up. I could see my blog post, in this case not very exciting, and going back. And now if I were to modify my layout, all the files would have that. So I have a little mini blog here, essentially. When I'm done, I could run just 11e. And then all I have in my site folder is straight HTML. So a simple example, but hopefully you're beginning to see a little bit of the power there. If we kick it up a little bit, 11e supports ad hoc data. This is basically data that I specify that I want to use in the rest of my site. It also allows me to add different filters to my template languages. So if my client has a very weird way of formatting dates, year and then day of the week and then day of the month, I could actually build a subroutine to handle that, and then all of my site could use that when outputting dates. Also has really good support for pagination, and it also has plugins to do things like RSS. When we talk about data, we're typically talking about things like data about our pages, as well as custom data for the entire site. So I have an example of this. I'll go in demo 2 now. And I'm going to open up index.liquid again. And what I have now is I have a for loop. And I'm iterating over a variable called collections, which 11e will always have, and a value called post. This is being driven by my blog post, again, Apple and Beta, but they both now have a tags attribute. And because they're sharing the same tags, post, my index file gets access to that data and can iterate over it. So if I run this, and it makes a bit more sense when I run it, 11e serve, and I go back and I reload. I see my 2 blog posts. If I were to go in here and add a new file, we'll call it cooking.markdown, and I'm just going to copy Apple and really quickly call it the cooking post. I cook pies. I save it. I've written a new blog post. I go back and Elevity automatically has access to it. So I didn't have to go in there and add a link myself. I was in there. I could absolutely do things like sorting. I could sort by date. I could sort by any logic that I care about. And I could do things like pagination as well. It also supports this kind of random ad hoc data by using a underscore data folder. So if I have a JSON file filled with cats in this example, because I named it cats.json, I can go in a file like cats.liquid and literally just iterate over it. So this is kind of where you would imagine like an Access database or a SQL Server thing. One of the things I realized in a lot of my old Cold Fusion sites is that I would edit the data and I would never edit it again. So I'd have Cold Fusion, I'd have PHP doing SQL statements to data that would change like once a year or so. I could definitely convert that to a flat file, and then within my Elevity code, treat it almost like it was a SQL query. Just to prove to you that's working, I'll click on cats, and that works. Now, what if that data was in a Mongo database or a SQL Server or perhaps via an API? Elevity supports that as well. In my underscore data folder, I can call an API, or I can load up a node library for Mongo or SQL Server. I could do asynchronous type stuff. I can grab that information. In this case, I'm hitting the Star Wars API. I'm getting a list of films, and I'm returning it. I named my file films.js, and because of that, I could then write a simple liquid file where I could say for film and films, iterate over that. So if I look at the films, you can see it's all rendered there. And once again, so this is dynamic, but if I run just Elevity and look at the output, go into site, go in films, there is a flat file. So this is kind of an interesting example of something with static websites. So obviously my website won't update automatically, but I know where my data is coming from. It's coming from films, Star Wars films, which at best were once a year, and they have slowed down a bit. Based on my knowledge of when data is changing, if I needed to, I could write a simple scheduler that once a year regenerated my site, and that would be good enough. Or even once a day, that'd be overkill. But if it takes, it took 781 milliseconds. I can regenerate this every day, and the day that a new Star Wars film was available via that API, it would show up in my website. So the good news is that you guys are all JAMStack experts now. So you can go to LinkedIn and add JAMStack. So I literally did this today because why not? You can say whatever you want. But yeah, it's true. I am a JAMStack expert. So you can do that. So Elevity absolutely supports a lot more. Any questions before I go on? All right, so talking about location, this is my disclaimer that I work at a company that provides location services. I think this company is pretty cool. Everything I'm showing is going to be from my company, but I'll also say everything that I'm demonstrating can be done with other companies. There is a small search engine company in California that also does mapping. Everything I'm showing you could do with their services as well. And there's other competitors out there that's doing what I'll be showing as well. So I like to be like fully like honest and straightforward about when I'm talking about my products or my company's products. So if you want to be a Here developer, you do have to sign up first. There is a free and paid tier. Everything I'm showing today is on the free tier. I think we are extremely generous. especially compared to that little search engine company in California. But you could, we're very clear about the number of API calls and all that. All the docs, examples, etc., will be at developer.here.com. And the one thing that you'll need for all of the demos is a key. And I will show you that. Although I did check in my key to GitHub, and I'll explain why that's not as horrible as it sounds. But once you've logged into the developer portal and you go to your project, you will see that we have JavaScript keys and REST API keys. Until recently, our documentation was a bit unclear on this. The JavaScript keys can absolutely work for our REST APIs as well. So I recommend just getting a JavaScript key. You can create a domain whitelist. I should do that because I took my keys into GitHub, but I'm not worried about my bill going up because I work here. But you could do what I'm showing today by making the JavaScript key and just making that whitelist, and then it's safe for your key to be in public-facing JavaScript code. So let's talk about location stuff. And I'm going to take everything that's involved in location and kind of boil it down to 3 things. So at a high level, that typically involves maps, geocoding and searching of location data, and then routing. Now, there's a heck of a lot underneath these 3 bullet points. I'm going to be showing a bit of each of these broad topics. But like in my mind, this is how I kind of organize everything involving location. When we talk about maps, we're either talking about client-side JavaScript rendered maps, which Google Maps made famous, or we're talking about static image-only maps. So we have what we call a Maps API for JavaScript. Surprise, surprise, this requires JavaScript. It's not going to work well without it. The next topic I'm talking about is static maps, and that will work definitely without JavaScript. But this is basically how you will do interactive mapping. So we've all seen maps where you can drag and you can zoom in and zoom out. This is our solution for it. It supports things like adding markers, doing routing, drawing random shapes and overlays on it. It also supports doing geocoding, showing traffic, clustering lots of data. It gets really, really complex. I'm definitely not going to go crazy with the maps today. But if you follow that link on the slide deck, you can get to our documentation and see more examples. So our maps, kind of step by step, you will include some libraries. And if you see 4 libraries there and 1 CSS, and be like, oh, well, Google only has 1 JavaScript file. Yes. So one of the things our maps do is that by default, we start them a bit simpler. So for example, by default, you can't pan our maps, because we have this thinking that if you don't need that interactivity, we'll make that initial download a bit smaller for you. So if you want things like, for example, the basic zoom in and out controls, again, that's an optional thing that you can add if you need it. So, don't be afraid by that. Just know that like our default is a bit smaller and simpler, and you layer on the aspects that you need. You then figure out some part on your website where you want to render that map. And then you begin adding a little bit of code. So you'll begin with your key. And again, you can make that domain whitelist. So this is totally safe to use. You create an instance of our platform object with that key. And then you create your map object. Typically what you'll do is use some default layers. And this is how we handle the colors and things like that. You point it to the part of your web page where you want the map. You tell it what type of map you want. In this case, a simple vector map. And then you pass in options. In this case, I specified a zoom level. I specified where I want to center it, and also did some things with my pixel ratio as well. If you want the interactivity, if you want the default UI controls, it's 2 more lines of code. But again, you'll want to make sure that you install those libraries as well. All of this on one page is in test simple map. And outside of me adding a bit of CSS to size the map, everything on here is stuff that you've already seen. And if I render this, just to show you. Demos, map demos, test simple map. You get a map centered on Louisiana. And again, we have all seen interactive maps, so I won't spend too much time on this. But again, you absolutely have options for the color scheme, for how you zoom, where it's centered, and so forth. So adding data interactivity, typically this is done via markers. We also support doing shapes. So if you want to draw like a box, for example, to represent a region that you care about on the map, you can do this. You can also do HTML and SVG just overlays. And typically when someone does like a map legend, they may use an overlay. You can also support drawing routing maps on the map. And you could do event handlers. So I want to know when the map is zoomed. I want to know when the map is clicked on and stuff like that. I'm going to mainly focus on markers because it's the simplest example. And the logic is simply to create an instance of a marker object, tell it where it's located, and then add it to the map. And that's it. If you want a custom icon, that's the second example. You can also do custom HTML, custom sizes. You can rotate it. You can get pretty complex with this if you want to. So I have an example of this, and again, it is in an 11 site. And I'm going to run this first and then show you the code behind it. All right, localhost 8080. All right, so this is a map. I have a crap ton of markers on there. And how did I build that? So what I did is I created a data file. In this case, I used a GeoJSON file. GeoJSON is basically a flavor of JSON. It's still JSON, but it's JSON data that has specific geographical information. And it could be points, it could be regions, but basically it's used a lot in mapping applications to take ad hoc data and say where it's located. In my case, it's data from the National Park System. So I have a name of a park and I have a park code. I put that in my 11 data, and I wanted to use that in the map. So in index.liquid, I have pretty much the exact same code you saw before. I started up my default map. I center it on Louisiana. I really should center it in like Chicago or something. But after the map is created, what I did was I did an AJAX call to load my GeoJSON. I waited till it was done, and then all I did was iterate over that and add markers. Now, I did something a bit funky here. The files and underscore data are not available to your website when it's published. It's basically used to build stuff. So I actually used a liquid file, and I outputted that data as just raw JSON. And 11 allows me to specify a custom in location. And this is like the main reason I left Hugo, is because it was really hard to say, I want to output something that's not .html. With 11, it's like, you want to call it .poop? I'm fine, dude. Like, whatever you want to output, you tell me, and I will write to that file. And that's what I did here, so I could have access to it on the client side in my JavaScript. The reason that I did kind of those steps is that I also built a second example where I used pagination. And I used pagination by pointing it to that data. And 11 used this as a template, and it ended up making all the pages, in this case 50 each, to handle iterating over those parks. And if we look at that, and I called that park list, should be right there. There is 50 parks, and I have next links to scroll over all these. So I really, really like 11's support for this. Out of all the generators I've looked at, I've not seen any that does pagination as simple as this. And they provide variables for things like the first link, the next, the last, if there is a next page, if there is a previous as well. So that is our dynamic maps. And again, they allow for a heck of a lot more interactivity. So you can go crazy in terms of what you do with the map. If you need something a bit simpler, we have a static map API called the Map Image API. This still supports markers and routing, etc., but in a non-interactive reason. Why would you use this? Email. Many voice assistants like the A word. That's what I call it at my house. I call it the A word because if I say it, about 20 different devices are like, yes, can I help you? The A word and the G word both have devices that support showing a UI. The static map would be great for this. And you know, sometimes you don't need an interactive map. You literally want to show where a location is and you're done. So this is an API. It's not. It's literally an image URL where you pass in a couple of options and your API key, and you put all this in an image source, and like, that's it. So for example, and I'm using an HTML-based slideshow, that image is the URL you see below. I have the API key in there. I took it out to make the text a bit smaller on page. That's like a default option for centering at that particular location. I can also specify more options. In this case, I could add a little text thing on top. Also notice that I'm not using latitude and longitude. Instead, I used a text-based thing instead. So if I don't have latitude and longitude, I could do address-based searches as well. So as an example, I took that cool pagination thing and I built the second version. And all I did is, as I iterated over every park, because I have the geometry, because I know their location, I was able to add static map links to it. So I'm using that in here. I'm iterating over my pagination. I'm getting the location. I added another 11 file to store my key. And that's in a data file called site.json. Now that key is going to be public. But what I like is that if I do have to change my key for whatever reason, because it's in a data file, it's like a application variable in Cold Fusion. I have it in one place, I could update it in one place, and my entire site will then get it. And I'm still running demo 3. That was park list 2. And you can see all of the images. And I did nothing in terms of making it look really nice. I could have sized this. I could have done CSS to show like 4 or 5 parks in a row. I definitely could have made this look a little bit nicer. In terms of geocoding and search, geocoding basically is, given an address, where is that exactly? The reverse of that is, given a precise address, what can I find that? And then search is, given an address, what stuff is around that particular address. So we have a geocoding API. It allows you to pass a freeform text address, and then the result will be the exact address. So if I open up that, come on, Zoom, go away. I hate that the Zoom UI is right on top where my browser is as well. Let me do this. And let me close this. And let me do this. Open a new tab. There we go. So this is the JSON result for looking up that particular address. You can see it did find a Cajun Dome Boulevard, and it gave me a precise address. And it did find a couple others as well. It gives me a score, so I know that this one is really, really good, 0.99, and I know it's right, versus Cajun Street, which I know is not right and has a lower score. That's a basic geocoding example. The reverse of that is basically I provide the location, in this case, a latitude and longitude, and it tries to tell me what is found there. And if I open up this result, we can see that this is actually our local airport, which has a street address of 200 Terminal Drive. And I'll point out both of these APIs support many more options in terms of asking for more precision or specifying that it's within a certain zip code. You can get very, very precise and have much more flexibility with these APIs. So I did build a simple demo of this. And let me go into demo 4 and run my server again. I'm sorry, serve, not server. All right, so localhost 8080. The way that this one is working is like so. I had a set of data, in this case, a set of cats, and I did not know exactly where they were. You can imagine I'm working with a cat shelter of some sort, and they're reporting to me information about their cats, but when they report it to me, it's kind of free-form text. If I want to know exactly where this data is, I need to geocode those locations into pure text. Alevity supports writing code in my data file that will run on startup. So in this case, what I've done is I've looped over all of my cats. I've called here's Geocoding API. I've got it in this function here. I return that data and I kind of narrow it down a little bit. And then I add that position to my cats. So now my cats have a location and they have a precise a position value as well. That then allows me then to render that out as I have on screen. I show their lat and I show their long. And again, this is all done at build time. So I can make this such that if I get cat data once a day, I regenerate my site once a day. It does those expensive API calls, publishes my site out to the web, and then everyone who hits this site, they are getting just the HTML version of this. It's incredibly fast. I mean, once you geocode something, you don't have to re-geocode it. You found it, you know where it is. In terms of search, this kind of goes into finding POIs or points of interest. For here, we kind of break this down into two separate APIs. We have one that's more of a textual search. So, you know I ate at a good restaurant called Don's something. So I may want to search for Don's. We also have an API that's browse, which is more category based. So, you know what? I don't remember what it was called. To just show me all the restaurants or all the banks around a particular point. Now, when I say around a point, for our APIs, that means either at a point, in a box, or any particular radius around something. So our Discover API works pretty simple. I give it a location, I give it a text-based search, in this case restaurant, and I pass in my API key. If we look at this, I search for restaurant. Surprise, surprise, Louisiana has about 2 billion of these. And I can see that it's finding things, also returning categories for me that give me information about my results. And it's probably hard to see, but there's a lot of data in this result. Again, the browse example is where I know specific APIs. In this particular example, particular categories. In this particular example, my categories are all related to tourist stuff. So monuments, museums, parks, and things like that. So open up this, and once again, I see data related to things that I was searching for. And I can see that my first result was a park. It's called Beavers Park. If I scroll down to the next one, we also return stuff like when they're open, contact information, and so forth. This is all stuff that you can provide to the end user. So I think our category system is really, really neat. It has 3 different levels of when I was typing this, I knew I was going to stutter. Specificity. Our docs get pretty intense on this, but like for the main category system, if you're interested in restaurants, you could find that. But if you're interested in a fine dining restaurant, you can get very specific. What's really cool is that we have this stupid, insane food categorization system where, like, if you like Asian food, we have about 80 or 90 or 100 different categories. And if you say you like Chinese food, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, like 18 different types of Chinese food. So if you really like hot pot, we can help you find hot pot. And if you've never had hot pot, you have to try hot pot. You've not had Asian food until you've had that. So I do have a demo of this. And I will, again, I'm going to show this running first and then show you the code behind it. So what this particular static website is doing, it's a cat rescue site or whatever. And once you have a cat, you may need to get some cat food. So I used our APIs to look for places around me. I used the browser's geolocation API to find where I am currently. And then I used the Here API to look in that particular category to get that data. The code for this is not terribly complex. And I'll show just the JavaScript. I'm using Vue.js. That's definitely not a requirement for 11e or the JAMStack at all. But it is the best framework, and I will go on record as saying that. But this is my Here API call right here. So I'm basically passing my location. I got that by using the browser's geolocation API. I pass in my category. This is pet supplies, I believe. And then when I have my results, I just return it, and Vue.js renders it. And that's literally all it is. So routing starts off pretty simple. So we have an API that will tell you how to get from A to B, and it just gets exponentially more complex from there based on your needs. We support something called isoline routing, which I never heard of, but it's this idea of, I'm here, I have 10 minutes, how far can I go? Or I have this much gas, how far can I go? Or I have an hour, how far can I go? For companies that are doing deliveries, stuff like this is really important. We also have a routing API that will mix and match things. Like, I'm going from A to B, but I want to walk and use public transport. We have an API that will give you those particular options. If you're doing anything with trucks, then routing again gets more complex because you care about the size and you care about the nuclear waste that may be in the back of the truck, stuff like that. Although, as we know, most superheroes are created by a truck carrying waste having some sort of accident. So I say drive on. There's a lot of data about this at our docs. This is one particular example, and it's simple but still a bit complex, where I specified that I'm going by car, I'm saying where I'm starting, where my destination is, and then I'm asking for data back. Again, you can get more complex, even including when I'm starting to drive, and the API will take into account its estimated traffic. And if I'm starting at like 8 a.m., it may specify a different route to avoid areas of heavy traffic. The data returned from this is rather complex. Returns directions, it returns information about the line of routing if you wanted to map it. And that's what all this data here. And it does a summary as well. I have an example of this still in 11.5. And no, I'm sorry, it is 11.6. I mean, demo 6. But it's pretty similar. It's once again a pet store. And the only difference in this one is that this time the pet store wants to tell you how to get to it. And that's actually a pretty common way, something that you may want to do if you have a store. You may want to help a person get to you. And by the way, the ugly cat background, I apologize. That's not a requirement for 11e. I thought it was cute. But all of these directions, and these are actually pretty accurate. And again, you can render this a lot nicer, show one at a time, whatever. But literally, this is one more Vue.js file calling one more API. In this case, it's a routing API. I get the data back, and I return what I care about. I forget if I showed it, but I also was able to do a summary on top where I show the number of hours and how many miles it is. I think I picked Dallas, and so this is pretty accurate. So that was really quick, a lot of stuff. Going back to the JAMStack, I talked earlier about cores and hiding keys and stuff. If you use a serverless function, then that just goes away. If you use something like Netlify, they make it super easy to bundle serverless functions with your site. So I have a website on Netlify. It uses the JAMStack. It has serverless functions, and Netlify handles all of the setup required to make that works. And this is actually a great example of where serverless shines is I want to use a third-party API, but I don't want you in the browser to open up DevTools and see what I'm using. So I basically create a proxy where I call the service, I may transform the result a little bit, and then I'll return it to you. JAMStack sites can also be API producers. This is in a very simple case, but going back to like my idea of having cat data, if I wanted my site to expose an API of cats that are available for adoption, I can output a JSON file. Now it's not an API where, give me all the cats that are female. It's not dynamic in that case. But if somebody wanted to access that data in a raw format, JAMStack sites can still produce stuff like that, and to allow other things like mobile apps consume that information. If you want to know more about this, on my blog, I have written 60 as of now different posts about the JAMStack in general and Analevity. You can check that out. And bam, that's it. Hour and a half. That's it's going for an hour, so I'm happy with that, I guess.
That was amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, seriously, that was great, Raymond.
Really amazing. Can you talk a little bit more about here as a company and how, like, if you can access all this API for free, like, how are you guys making money?
So, I mean, we have API limits. It's really generous. I'm going off my memory, but I think 250,000 API calls a month. So as a developer, you can absolutely play with it and not worry about it. It may be 20,000 or something, but it's definitely developer friendly. Like, I'm never going to worry about that being an issue. We have that paid tier, which gives you more calls, gives you more support. We have a database solution called Data Hub, which allows you to put geospatial data on our server. And we provide some APIs that make it a bit nicer to work compared to like a generic Mongo server. So for example, like when you have your geospatial data in Data Hub, if you want to return results within a bounding box or within a radius of a circle, we do that manipulation for you a bit simpler. We also have a mapping solution that's UI based that has a paid solution on top of that as well.
Wow. Very cool. And where does your mapping data come from?
So there's like an official answer for that I'm really bad at answering. We have a variety of sources. So we buy some sources, we get our own sources, and we combine them together. We also work with client data as well. So for example, if you're a shipping company and your home base is really big because you have semi trucks coming in, you can actually put your map data in our system and only you have access to it. And you can route a truck so that they're coming from far away, but you can literally route them to a stall inside your location.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, we allow you to do that beginning to end type solution, as opposed to just like going to a street address and then at that point you're SOL.
Right. It's amazing.
On the static site generation side of things, is there ever I don't know, there's not right. I'm wondering if there are realistic situations where you might have a website you want to build where 99% of the website can be a static site thing. And then there's that one-off page. It's like, this one page, to try to do that in the JAMStack is going to be way more trouble than it's worth, and we're going to lose functionality. That page has to be a Vue.js page, a PHP file, or something like that. Is that a common scenario people run into? And are there best practices for that sort of thing?
So I think there's two answers to that.
Okay.
So serverless functions is like my escape hatch. I need something weird. I write my one function and I do my weird thing. I use JavaScript code on the client to call it, and that would allow me to do that one weird thing. If it's a lot more than one weird thing, I think a great example of that is a bank. So a bank has a site with all their branches and their products and all that crap that could absolutely be static. And then, myaccount.bank.com could be a traditional app server.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
I know I had other questions. I can't think of what they are now.
Yeah, this is the first demo I've seen of a static site generator that's made me actually start pondering in my head which of my sites do I have that I could actually port over to this and kill off some of the CMS engines that I have to maintain right now.
Yeah, 11e is just really, really nice. It really appealed to me.
Does it concern you at all that it's not even at version 1 yet? I'm always hesitant to go learn something that's like in a 0 point. Who knows how long it's going to stick around.
So I'm not worried about it going away. It definitely has bugs. It definitely has behaviors I don't like, but I'm okay with that. For example, so for my last 2 demos, they were primarily client-side demos on a static website. I was using Vue.js. I wrote it in a Markdown file. Markdown has a feature where when you tab code over, it outputs it as if you tab over HTML, it outputs it as escaped HTML because it assumes you mean a code listing. So I was building my Vue stuff, and I was tabbing over to make it nicer to read because I don't mind writing HTML, and Markdown's okay with that, but as soon as you tab over, it escapes it. So then I thought, okay, well, it'll be ugly, but that's fine, right? So it's just local. I'll have everything left aligned. 11e also allows you to write Markdown and also use Liquid. So I can actually do dynamic stuff in Markdown if I wanted to. I don't do that. I forgot about that. And the Liquid variable syntax is the same as Vue's variable syntax.
Okay.
So the server-side code parsed it. It's like, oh, I have a variable here, it doesn't exist. I'll just do an empty string. The client-side code never saw it because it was already gone. So what did I do? So in Liquid, you can use a tag called raw and in raw, which basically means ignore what I'm doing. And that's what I've had to do on my blog when I talk about Vue.js. Now, in my editor, I have a keyboard combo. So I see my Vue.js code I'm writing stuff about, I wrap it in that with my keyboard combo, and it's fine.
That's fun. That's very cool.
Yeah, and Bill, and Raymond, correct me if I'm wrong, but Bill, I think your concern about 11 being so new, even if it went away, let's say tomorrow, it's not that big of a concern because all the things you build in 11D are all
they're all static.
And none of that syntax is 11D specific. Like Markdown is Markdown, and JavaScript is JavaScript, and if you're
so remember when I said that there was some complexity?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I converted from Jekyll to 11D, I definitely ran into some issues. 11D ships Liquid as a template engine, but an older version compared to what Jekyll shipped. So there was stuff that I did that didn't work. So I just did workarounds, and that was okay. The way that 11D demos creating a blog is to use the tag system. So you tag all your blog articles the same way in that front manner. And actually, there's also a shorthand way to do it one time in one file. You do that, and then for 11E, like that's a collection of blog posts. I was already using tags to describe my content. So the JavaScript tag, the Cold Fusion tag.
Right.
So I had to do it. I had to get all of my blog posts in a different way. Not a hard way, but I had to make sure that I had that code working to get the same output. So if 11E went away, or if I decided I hated it, and I went to a new one, I would have to do some thinking about just everything in general. I have to do some thinking about stuff. So my 6,000 blog posts that came over, I didn't really have an issue except for maybe 100 that had some code that had to be escaped. I was able to find all that in Visual Studio Code and kind of manually do it over like an hour, and I was done. So it was a process to convert.
Okay.
And also, like having a large site, my build times are about 5 minutes, which I'm fine with. But I had to do things to make that possible. So on my blog now, in the right-hand pod or column, there's my last 5 blog posts. That's actually loaded via a JavaScript XHR call. And the reason I did that is because every time I wrote a new blog post, when I had to have my layout, all 6,000 posts had to be updated because that right-hand side changed. So my build times, and this really hit me in the Jekyll time frame compared to Hugo, my build times were like 40 minutes or so. It was crazy. So I had, again, my complexity on my local side. I rebuilt it to do it so that only one file had the last 5 posts, and that file is called via like a jQuery call. Like I used the simplest solution possible.
Yeah. Okay.
Couldn't you do that part as like an include so that it's just an include file that gets written once and then is included on all of them?
Right, but when it generates the HTML, it's going to run that include 6,000 times.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay.
So like now, when I do a blog post, the home page changes because that has the last 10 posts. The new post obviously is a new file. And then I have a category list page and a tag list page. So that's two more files. And then the little page that gets injected via JavaScript, that gets updated with the new post. So only 5 files get touched. When I do like a site-wide change, my build times go to like, I think now it's like 10 minutes or so. So it's still not horrible. Jekyll 3 was a bit slower. Jekyll 4 got a lot faster.
Mm-hmm. I think part of my concern generally with sort of the new versions of things is, what's and this isn't about 11D in particular, but what's the, who's in charge of this product? What's the roadmap for it? What are they really working on? Where are they going to? And, it's just like, you only have to have been burned so many times by, so many different products, and like some jerk takes over it and decides to not do anything with it, or or go off in some weird direction. I don't know.
Yeah, but you could almost argue that that's true of any product ever.
Yeah.
Like that's not specific to a thing that's way early in alpha, like 11D, version 0.11.
But I think the communities do tend to stabilize after a while.
And again, so my pain converting was a case with 6,000 pieces of content.
Yeah.
I think most regular sites.
That's pretty cool that you could go to a different static generator and with a little bit of work move it over. I think that's really awesome. Can you go back to that to the website, to the GitHub repository that has all of the APIs?
Yes, that was way towards the beginning.
I know it's at the beginning of your slides.
It's coming up. It is.
No.
I'll also copy and paste it into the chat.
Public APIs, okay. That is, that's cool. I've been looking for some APIs that I can use in lessons that don't require a key.
So if you like beer, there's an open brewery database that's like that.
I found one for dogs. It does dog breeds, and I've been looking for some different ones. I guess the Giphy Cat one is one you can use pretty easily.
Was it this one? The Stanford Dogs dataset?
No, that's different actually. I forget what it's called. I might be able to find it on my computer. I don't have it up. Look around for it. Yeah, that's cool. I'm gonna have to look at that. Look there and see what sort of APIs I could use with lessons that don't require any kind of key, that just talk about consuming data, without having to make students run off and get a key and plug it in. Maybe do that too, but I mean, right from the beginning, it'd be kind of nice just to do some without needing any kind of key. Authorization API key. All right, great. So a lot of them actually say right there.
And don't forget, it could require an API key, but support host restrictions, and that's totally safe to use.
Yeah, no, I'm not worried about the safety thing. I'm just, in teaching students
Yeah.
sort of the beginning of how to consume data from a different source. I just want to make it as easy and simple as possible.
Bill, there's a placeholder goat images one there.
Yeah, place goat. Look at that.
API for everything.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Hey,
Very
I have a
cool.
question.
Sure.
Or can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I'm done lurking for now. I have a couple questions. First of all, like, is there anything that makes an API like particularly suited for use from like I guess like a front, like either a single page application or a static site generation, a statically generated site, for example? I mean, I was looking through the API for here, and like it doesn't, like there's nothing that particularly makes it, what makes it particularly good, or is there anything that makes it particularly good for like Jamstack style websites?
Well, I would say for client-side development in general, I don't think it's any different for Jamstack per se. Like if you're still doing a classic ASP or whatever, but you have client-side code, certainly it's supporting cores, even though it's easy to work around it, not having to write a serverless function just to proxy that is nice. If you do ask for an API key, if you support hostname restrictions, then it's safe to put in your client-side code. You just restrict it to your domain. Other things would be like allowing me to reduce the amount of data returned so I can be better for my end users and not return a bazillion things of data. Like we don't do that. But like if we had something like a GraphQL front end where the calling code could say, I want to search for restaurants and all I want is their name and their open hours. That's it. Stuff like that would be nicer because then there's less data flowing back to the end user.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking of this from, I'm more of a backend person. So, if I were to make an API, what would attract this crowd, which seems like a, perfectly good market to try to pursue. Gotcha. Also, you said you were a Vue.js. I'm also a Vue.js user, and was wondering, have you looked at some of the like the Vue.js based one? Like, I think Nuxt.js generates static sites, and I've been looking at that one. But have you had any shiny object syndrome where you started saying, "Hey, that there's 3,000 and there's a couple in Vue," so.
So yeah, I've looked at Nuxt, I've looked at Gritsum. Gritsum is interesting because it adds a GraphQL layer on stuff. I just prefer 11 I love using Vue.js to generate my client side or to do client side stuff. I didn't necessarily find it appealing on the server side. That's just me.
Any other questions, comments?
I can't think of anything else. It's really awesome, though.
Awesome.
I'm going to look into the 11 for sure.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording then.